Let's start with the fact that despite all the scientific and technological progress, humanity has not found a proper way to peacefully coexist on the planet. There are many wars taking place every single day, and weapons are becoming even more dangerous. It seems that different countries are trying to compete to figure out the best way to destroy each other. Today, we will compare the armies of North Korea, South Korea, Israel, India, and China, as well as the military power of the NATO and Russian Federation. Watch this video to the end to find out about the strongest army in the world. The last place in our rating is taken by the North Korean army. Since this is the most unknown and closed country in the world, the relevant data on the state of the DPRK economy is classified, so even less is known about the army. Judging by the strictness of the current regime, this totalitarian state is even more dangerous than the USSR of the Stalinist period. As of today, North Korea has one of the strongest armies in the world with 1 million people serving there. We are taking only active officers now. There are 6 million people in reserve. In North Korea, people are not given a choice. Every citizen is obliged to serve in the army unless they have an exceptionally good reason to avoid doing so. Women must serve for 7 years and men for 10. The local army has numerous air forces, ballistic missiles, and a powerful submarine fleet. It can be easily confirmed by the military parades that Kim Jong-un loves to arrange to show off. It is really an impressive sight. However, in reality, things are not as good as at the parade. The DPRK government demands a lot from soldiers but does not really care about them. The state of health of most soldiers is extremely unsatisfactory, and the conditions created for them in the army are in many ways even worse than those of prisoners in civilized countries. Soldiers have to eat raw corn kernels or potatoes. In addition, only a couple of potatoes are given to each person. Interestingly, even in peacetime, when the DPRK is not at war with anyone, the army loses soldiers, since not everyone can withstand the harsh army conditions. As a result, many of them die right during service. It's no secret that civilized countries don't really want to see North Korea among their partners and allies. However, Kim Jong-un doesn't seem to care too much. For him, the main thing is to make people afraid of the DPRK. And he managed to achieve this goal, mainly due to uncoordinated tests of nuclear weapons. The behavior of the country's leader is incomprehensible and unpredictable, which only increases anxiety about the DPRK. People are getting shocked when they discover some shocking facts. For example, in 2017, soldiers were ordered to throw mines right into the Yellow Sea. Allegedly, they were supposed to kill Americans who were about to attack. As a result, the mines washed ashore and killed 110 people from North Korea. The soldiers of the DPRK should be constantly on alert. Why? According to the regime, the enemy will attack their great country as soon as they feel their weakness. The main enemies of the DPRK are South Korea and the USA. At the same time, the enemy still does not attack, and Kim Jong-un himself has the prudence not to attack anyone. Interestingly, the country develops its military equipment and sells it to Egypt, Syria, Pakistan, and Yemen. The South Korean army consists of ground forces, naval, and air forces and works strictly on a conscription basis. The ground forces are armed with about 2,500 tanks. There are around 80 T-80 tanks, which Russia gave to South Korea in the mid-90s of the last century. There are also tanks of their own production called the Black Panther. But most of the tanks are K-1s, which look pretty similar to Abrams from the USA. There are also several old American tanks. South Korea is developing its own missile forces. Currently, the ground forces are armed with Kunmu tactical missiles of their own production. Kunmu-1 are mobile-based missiles with a range of 180 kilometers, while Kunmu-2 are mine-based missiles with a range of up to 300 kilometers. The Air Force is armed with about 700 aircraft for various purposes. Among them, there are American fighters of the latest generation F-15 and F-16. The Navy has about 150 warships and submarines in operation. In technical and economic terms, South Korea has long overtaken its neighbors in the north. However, due to the presence of nuclear weapons in the DPRK, it's unlikely that the South Koreans will soon decide on active military action. Unlike North Korea, the UK is one of the leading countries in the world that takes an active part in the system of international relations. If we compare armies by personnel, then the UK will lose to the DPRK. There are only 180,000 soldiers in the service, but every soldier is fed, shod, and provided with everything necessary for the high-quality performance of the assigned combat tasks. The country's military budget is $53 billion. The United Kingdom has a very highly developed military-industrial complex, which is capable of producing tanks, aircraft, warships, and many other modern equipments. The British Navy is particularly strong, and its Special Operations Forces are considered among the best in the world. The Special Air Service, or SAS, which was created during the Second World War, deserves the most attention. Today, these troops are considered the benchmark for the rest of the armies of the world. To be in these troops, you need to undergo strict selection and serious training. Although the UK is not a member of NATO, it participates in almost all military conflicts on the side of the USA. India is a huge and densely populated country with a booming economy. There are 1,350,000 people serving in the Army of India, and this is despite the fact that there is no mandatory conscription system in the country. India spends $67 billion a year on military needs. The country is in constant confrontation with China over disputed territory. The history of the conflict goes back to the time of the British Empire. The armed forces of independent India appeared in 1947 on the grounds of military units of the Army of the British Empire. The army consists of air and naval forces. There are also various paramilitary formations, such as national security forces and special border services. The tank fleet contains about 4,000 tanks in combat-ready condition. Some of these tanks are of their own production. There are also modern Russian T-90s and Soviet-made T-72 tanks. Missile forces possess medium and short-range ballistic missiles. India also has a limited supply of nuclear weapons. About 35 of them are now in a combat-ready state. India's air defense consists mainly of Soviet-made weapons, but there is also a small percentage of Israeli anti-aircraft missile systems. According to the level of mobilization readiness and the availability of modern weapons, the army is ready to perform various functions for the defense of the country. India maintains close military technical cooperation with France, the United Kingdom, and the USA. Interestingly, the Indian Special Forces fighters are selected by their height. After that, they have to go through a system of exceedingly difficult tests and only then begin training. In fact, from the very first day of its existence, the State of Israel was faced with the need to defend its right to exist by military means. Because of this, the Israeli army is constantly on alert. The state has created its own independent military-industrial complex. Israeli military equipment is considered one of the best in the world. The personnel of the military forces number about 200,000 people, and about $20 billion are spent on the defense budget. Israel has never made a statement that the country has nuclear weapons. However, Israel has never denied its existence. The country has not signed the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and intelligence agencies from different countries admit that Israel has a fully operational strategic nuclear triad. The Israeli army has a lot of combat experience. From the end of the Second World War to the present day, the state has taken part in 15 military conflicts of varying intensity. In some cases, they had to deal with an opponent twice their number. Even in such complex situations, Israel was able to keep its title of the winner. The Israeli army can safely be called, if not the strongest, then certainly the most beautiful army in the world, because every fifth person here is a woman. There is no division into male and female duties in the Israeli army, so there is complete equality. The only difference is the duration of service. Men serve 36 months and women 21 months. The state motivates its citizens for military service with decent payments, a high level of medical care, and the right to receive education at any university in the country after military service. The People's Liberation Army of China has the largest number of land forces in the world. There are 2,300,000 people serving in China now. China's military budget is $250 billion. Only the USA spends more on the army. This amount makes it possible to increase the level and improve military equipment. The Chinese have long proved to the whole world that they are the first on the digital front. However, you have to admit that they are able to produce not only smartphones. Despite the fact that China is the most populous country, they are not going to fight in numbers, but by using their sophisticated military equipment. This army is feared both in the East and in the West. There are ultra-modern fighters, a powerful fleet, and even nuclear weapons in service. But the Chinese have always been too smart to just throw projectiles at an opponent. The main attention is paid to cyber forces, which are aimed to destroy various systems of the enemy instead of destroying their forces. The destruction of equipment and even infantry is incredibly expensive and is accompanied by significant losses. It is much more practical to use digital resources because armies are dependent on information systems today. Such things as control systems, intelligence, data exchange, communications, and firefighting are integral elements of modern armies. By using the resource of electronic warfare and even psychological influence, you can bring chaos to the enemy command. The Strategic Support Forces of China were created in 2015. They include everything related to space forces and electronic warfare. There is also a separate department responsible for cyber warfare, namely the Department of Network Systems. In the Celestial Empire, they decided to learn from the mistakes of others and not from their own. After analyzing the experience of other countries, China came to the conclusion that instead of taking part in the arms race, a much more effective solution would be to impose a different format of confrontation on the enemy. They decided to force them to play by their own rules. Any military power can be neutralized simply by using sophisticated hacker skills of the key control systems, thus affecting the flow of information in systems, disinformation, and synchronization. Perhaps cyber warfare will soon move into a new generation of wars. Are there any cyber wars happening already today? What do you think about this? Share your opinion in the comments below. But do not think that if China relies on intelligence, then Chinese soldiers are weaker than others. This is not the case at all. In the army, Chinese soldiers train very intensively, so it is almost impossible to find a weak spot among the Chinese. The Second World War was the most terrible tragedy of the last century. When Nazi Germany finally capitulated, the whole world exhaled. It seemed that now it was finally possible to live together in peace and joy. But very soon the Soviet Union saw enemies in its former allies. The arms race between the USA and the USSR began. It was called the Cold War. In 1949, the NATO military bloc was formed, which included 12 countries. Initially, it included only 12 states. The solemn signing on the act— The solemn signing of the act on the creation of the North Atlantic Alliance took place in Washington. The main task of NATO was to create a system of collective security. The most important in the North Atlantic Treaty was Article 5 on collective defense. According to the article, an attack on any member country of the alliance would automatically result in a counterattack of the entire alliance. At the moment, 30 countries are members of NATO, and several more states are candidates. The bloc sets itself the task of not only protecting the alliance member countries, but also fighting terrorism in the world and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and reducing the threat posed by rogue states. By far, one of the strongest NATO armies is the US Army. Recently, the Global Firepower Organization published a list of the most powerful military forces in the world, and it's not difficult to guess that the USA took first place. The rating is based on an analysis of the country's weapons, available production facilities, human resources, level of military training, financial stability, and many other indicators. For 150 years, the USA has never allowed the war to unfold on its territory. In terms of the number of personnel, the US Army is second only to China. It relies on 1.38 billion soldiers. The military budget is $650 billion. Generals of other armies can only dream of such a sum. Only because of such an enormous budget, the USA can develop and purchase the most modern weapons. Currently, the US Navy has 11 nuclear aircraft carriers, more than 70 submarines, and a huge number of auxiliary ships. Of course, the military forces of the armies of other alliance countries are much more modest, yet they cannot be ignored. For example, France, which is one of the founders of NATO, has nuclear weapons. 220,000 soldiers serve there as of now. The country's military budget is $63 billion. The military-industrial complex of France allows the country to provide the army with all the necessary weapons, from small arms to tanks, aircraft, and reconnaissance satellites. Modern German military forces consist of land, naval, and air forces. There are 183,000 active soldiers. Since 2011, compulsory conscription has been discontinued, so now only contract soldiers serving in the army. In Germany, there are special paramilitary structures that are perfectly prepared to carry out missions such as the fight against terrorism. The Polish army is also recruited on a contract basis. There are 128,000 people serving there. In addition to infantry, naval, and air forces, the army includes units of the Territorial Defense Forces. But we will not consider each of the countries of the alliance separately. I think it's already obvious that if the armies of 30 countries, including the strongest US Army, unite together, then they are capable of crushing anyone. The alliance is not only ready to repel an attack on any of the member countries, but also provides tangible assistance to friendly states. Given recent events in the world, NATO's role in supporting Ukraine is increasing. The statements of the Russian government are becoming more aggressive every day, and the political leaders of NATO countries fear that if they do not stop the Russian army in Ukraine, the war will affect their countries as well. A direct clash between Russia and the NATO bloc is likely to lead to the use of nuclear weapons, and this could be the end of all human civilization. The Russian Federation openly declares that the war in Ukraine is only an intermediate stage. Russia has designated the collective West as its main opponent, whatever that means. No one knows what is really in Putin's head and how far he can go. Therefore, for the first time since the Second World War, the US Congress signed the Lend-Lease Law, according to which the Ukrainian army can quickly and without bureaucratic delays receive all the weapons and material resources it needs. In the first months of the war, the Ukrainian army demonstrated much better results than anyone expected from it. Not only the Russian Federation, but also the intelligence services of Western countries initially believed that under the onslaught of the Second Army of the World, according to the military experts, Ukraine would be forced to capitulate quite quickly. However, the Ukrainian army managed not only to protect the capital, but also to prevent the Russian army from making significant progress. And this is taking into account the fact that in the early days, the Ukrainian military used their own stock of weapons that remained from Soviet times. Then Javelin missile systems played a big role. It was used to destroy tanks. NATO openly reports on some arms supplies to Ukraine. Some data is most likely classified, but it is already obvious that the supply of modern weapons will significantly strengthen the Ukrainian position. During the 5 months of the war in Ukraine, the Russian army lost more than 40,000 personnel, more than 200 aircraft, almost 200 helicopters, about 2,000 tanks, and 15 ships. These are the data of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which are publicly available. According to the Pentagon, Ukraine has eliminated about 70,000 personnel, but American intelligence does not specify which percentage of this number are dead and which are wounded. According to British intelligence, the Russian Federation has already lost up to 30% of its ground combat effectiveness. According to the UK, about 50,000 soldiers have been killed or wounded in the war with Ukraine since February 24. Of course, for the sake of objectivity, official data on losses according to the version of the Russian Federation should also be given here. However, the Russian government does not openly report these figures. If we compare the forces of the parties at the moment, it is obvious that Russia has an advantage in two important parameters. The first is a living force. If full mobilization is announced in the country, it will be almost impossible to cope with so many people. However, these will be untrained, poorly motivated, and poorly armed fighters. To arm such a number of soldiers and make up for the loss of military equipment takes time and a lot of money. But still, if the Russian command decides to oppose technological progress with the number of soldiers whose lives will not be counted, then this may lead to victory, but the price for this will be huge. Even with the most conservative estimates, the number of Russian soldiers killed in the war with Ukraine has long been greater than the losses of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. While the second advantage over Ukraine is obvious, the Russian Federation is a nuclear power unlike Ukraine. However, if tactical nuclear weapons are used in the war with Ukraine, the North Atlantic Alliance will perceive this as a provocation and strike back. The USA is located on another continent, so it will not suffer from radiation. Ukraine borders the Russian Federation, therefore, in the case of the use of nuclear weapons, radiation will spread to the territory of Russia, Belarus, and other countries bordering Ukraine. But let's hope that doesn't happen. We want only peace and prosperity for our planet.